Can you tell us about the moment before your Hollywood career where you were working day jobs and a voice inside of you said, this isn't right, I'm supposed to be writing?
Well, it was a little bit more complicated than that. I was a college administrator at the time, the assistant director of the Indo-Chinese Refugee Assistance Program at Long Beach Community College. And I had 18 instructors working for me and 45 student aides. But one day somebody was sick, so I had to take over their class. And I was standing at the chalkboard. We still used chalk at the time. And I was writing something on the board, and then a little voice inside my head said, "This is not the plan." I had planned to be a writer when I graduated from college. And so I decided at that time I was going to make a change in my life. And I thought optimistically that 6 months savings would be great. And so I saved up some money, and I thought I had enough living expenses for 6 months. But I quit my job, and it took me 2 years to make a living as a television writer after that.
And so you went to school in Berkeley part of the time? And then...
I did undergraduate work at Berkeley, got my degree there, spent a year abroad my junior year at the University of Madrid. So I learned Spanish there. Then I went to graduate school at UCSD, and I was in the comparative literature program, and I wanted to do my dissertation as a novel instead of as a scholarly work. And they said no. And I said, well, but everything that I've learned would be exposed in the novel, just like everything that you learn would be exposed in your dissertation. And they said no again. And I said, well, okay, I'm leaving. And so that's when I quit school and I moved to Spain, where I felt very comfortable at the time, and started to write.
And did you feel they embraced the writer, the idea of the writer more in Spain, or just you personally felt more?
Well, I felt very at home in Spain. The situation in the States was very difficult, let's say. It's 1970. It was very difficult. There was a lot of anti-Vietnam stuff going on. The draft was there. But also I knew writers in Madrid. Some of my former professors were very well connected in the writing community. One was a very famous poet. As a matter of fact, my first published work is in Spanish, and it's a Spanish poem that I wrote when I was there in 1970.
What writers were you looking to sort of emulate, either style or even life trajectory?
Oh, that's interesting. No one's ever asked me that before. I appreciate that. You know, I was just looking up Raise High the Roof Beam Carpenters by J.D. Salinger the other day, because that title kept reoccurring in my brain. I was thinking, who wrote that? Who wrote that? Who wrote that? And it was Salinger. And I would say in my youth, that was probably one of the most influential writers. Franny and Zoe, another book of his of short stories, and of course, Catcher in the Rye. I wanted to be able to write like that.
And live that sort of reclusive lifestyle?
I didn't.
Oh, okay.
No, totally opposite of that lifestyle. I wanted to live in Europe. I really enjoyed living in Europe. I traveled. By the time I went back to Spain, I had already been in maybe 20 countries around Europe and the Middle East, North Africa. So I wanted to have that kind of freedom. As a writer, you can do that. You can travel and write, and you can be anywhere in the world and write whatever you need to write. So I didn't emulate any specific writer, but I think George Orwell was another influence. And I eventually went to live in an area of London called Hampstead. And there was a cafe that I used to go to that he went to 30 years before that. So that was kind of inspiring. Now it's a clothing shop, but then it was something very interesting for me.
How loud was this voice that said, I was meant to be a writer?
It was loud. Well, I had thought when I graduated from college that I wanted to be a writer. And as a matter of fact, my father sat me down one day and said, so what are you going to do now? How are you going to make a living? And I said, well, I want to be a writer professor. I want to be a novelist, and I want to write. But And I started to write as soon as I got out of college. Actually, I started to write in college, but nothing very good. But when I got out, I started to write a lot. I can't say there was a voice after that. But I had to do a lot of different kinds of jobs to make a living. And so it wasn't until that moment at the blackboard when I said I have to put everything down and forget about making a living and just write. Because when you're working like I was working, 24 hours a day kind of job, something that was very time consuming, weekends, and people always asking me questions and me having to give them life directions because we had so many immigrants from so many different countries in the program that I was at. I just didn't have time to write. But eventually I thought, if I don't do it now, I'm never going to do it. And this was my mid-30s. By that time, I was already in my mid-30s. I had written a couple of novels actually by that time, terrible novels. I don't want to even think about those anymore. Although I did, here's a very short anecdote. I was writing a novel about the circus. So I thought, I've got to do some research on the circus. I'd always been fascinated by the circus. I'd visited many different circuses by that time, especially in Europe, one-tent circuses, very small places. But there was a circus coming into town, Circus Vargas, which is, you probably have heard of it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a 3-ring circus under a tent.
Right.
So they had an advertisement in the LA Times looking for people to work setting up the tent. So I answered the advertisement. When I got there were a lot of other people from the employment development department there. So they had to take those people first. And I said, well, I want to do this research. So I went up to the guy that was hiring and I said, look, I will work for free if you'll let me work. And he said, okay, go ahead. And I worked till about midday when about half the crew quit because we were setting up tent in a very muddy area and people were having mud up to their ankles and they just walked away. And he said, are you going to stay? And I said, if you pay me. He said, yeah, I'll pay you. And I said, from this morning. And he said, okay. And as it turned out, after I finished the day, he said, can you come back tomorrow and tear down? And I said, sure. And then I worked the next weekend as well, setting up and tearing down. And then a year later, when they came back into town, I just showed up at the site. He said, hey, how you doing? Come on. And I started working again, obviously for pay this time.
That's fascinating.
Research is a very important part of writing, and sometimes you have to do deep research.
Did you see anything in the sort of some of the circus performers, maybe an attitude about travel or life that was infectious that you enjoyed?
Well, one of the most important things that attracted me to the circus and writing about the circus is the feeling of family that they have. The whole circus is a family. They support each other in everything. Certainly the acts, you might have 5 or 10 or sometimes even 15 people in one of the acts. They are all very, very tight. They work together. They rely on each other for their lives. So they rely on each other for a lot of things, and they always work together. And I really love that feeling of community and family. And I've written about that in several situations. And I think that's what attracted me to the circus, and that's what attracts me to a lot of other types of writing.
Have you always had an inner dialogue with yourself?
Well, there's always something going on in here. Sometimes it's in English. When I was studying Spanish, when it turned to Spanish, when I was walking down the street and suddenly I realized, hey, I'm thinking in Spanish. I thought that was fascinating. Yeah, there's always something going on. I'm always trying to be a better person. I think that's the goal of everybody. We all want to be better people. We want to be happy. We want to be comfortable, but we also want to be better as a person. I don't think I know anybody that doesn't want to be better. I don't know anybody that wants to be worse as a person. And so I guess that is, sometimes I stopped and think, was that the right thing to do? Or was there something else I could have done better? And I hope that other people think the same thing.
How did you know you were meant to be a writer? You heard this voice at the blackboard.
I don't know if I knew I was meant to be a writer. I don't know if there's anything that sets you up for that, except I spent a lot of time in the library when I was a kid. We had great libraries where I grew up. It was in Shaker Heights, Ohio, which is a suburb of Cleveland. And the suburb itself had plenty of money. So their junior high school was unbelievably well prepared in terms of the library, in terms of audiovisual equipment, in terms of a chorus room, an orchestra room, a projection room. I was on the projection crew, as a matter of fact. So I spent a lot of time going around from class to class with film. I knew how to thread a film projector from the age of 10. So I used to do that at elementary school and then in junior high school. So I knew I just felt an affinity for storytelling and watching stories and getting lost in stories. Somebody asked me the other day, what is the earliest book you remember reading and enjoying? And I remember curling up on a very comfortable chair in a library in Shaker Heights reading Dr. Dolittle. I don't know if you've ever read Dr. Dolittle, but the stories of this veterinarian and his relationship with animals. I read all the books by Laurie, I think is his last name. I can't remember his first name right now. Might be James. But in any case, I read all those books, and then I read tons of biographies. And I read in junior high school, I read 1984, I read Animal Farm, I read what else was it? Aldous Huxley's book, and I can't remember the name of it.
Brave New World?
Brave New World, thank you very much. So I was an avid reader, and I knew that I was going to have something to do with books.
How did you know you could make it work as a writer where you could make a living, support yourself?
That's an interesting question. I confronted that question just when I had that thought in my head, this is not the plan. I did a little research to see how much novelists made, because I wanted to be a novelist. And at that time, this was 1978, or no, 82, something like that. The average novelist made $875 a year. And I thought, well, if some novelists are making $1 million, most novelists are making nothing, if the average is $875. So I did a little investigation, and I found out that television writers make a good deal more than that. And I thought, well, I can write for television. If I can write a story, I can write a story for television. And that's when I started taking some classes. I took classes at UCLA Extension in writing for television. And I walked out of one class and I said, I want to be a television writer producer. And that's what I set my mind to do.
So the idea, sort of the Norman Mailer-esque lifestyle and writings may be exciting, but you knew it was rare?
Yeah, it's very rare to make a living as a novelist. Although there's other kinds of writing that was attractive to me. For example, Hunter S. Thompson and his kind of crazy stuff. I loved reading his books. I wanted to write like that, but at that time I couldn't. But I've slowly moved towards a more open style. And if you read my books, my novels now, you can see that there's a very open and conversational style. I was talking to my attorney today. He's been my showbiz attorney for 30 years. And he had read my book, and he said, I like the way you talk to yourself in the book and talk to the reader in the book, even though I'm not talking directly to the reader and I'm not talking directly to myself. The book is called Lies, All Lies, but you'll see it's set in the sitcom world of pre-pandemic, just the year before the pandemic, 2019. And it relies a lot on my experiences in that world. So I guess you could say that I was thinking that I wanted to live a decent life. I wanted to live a free life, and writing was the way to do that.